I should warn you that I oftentimes speak very quickly. So if I start speaking really fast, just wave or something so I can move it down. So when I saw kind of the lineup of the other speakers, or the other sessions, I got a little scared because every single one of them is kind of talking about how to use JavaScript and PhoneGap, just want to build platform applications. And I don't believe in that stuff at all. I kind of think that you kind of just have, I kind of have a very, very different viewpoint, and I think you have to build native applications. So I thought that after I get this talk, they might all come together and beat me up. So if you see me getting beaten up, please stop me. So let me kind of tell you about myself and what I do a little bit. As you mentioned, before I came to BSP, I was a director during Amiibo. I work on the server-side and mobile teams. I work on our mobile applications, including the Android and the iPhone and the BlackBerry apps. Now at BSP, I'm kind of responsible for our HackApp across 6 native platforms right now. So I kind of know a couple things about building native applications. Let me tell you kind of what happened to me about a year ago. I moved from San Francisco to New Delhi. I showed up to the office one day. There was no one in the office besides me and Gavin. And he says, Vijay, I want to have 6 applications out, feature complete by March. And I went back home and I immediately looked for flights back to San Francisco. I mean, that's really impossibly difficult to do. But I said, okay, well, we got to do this. We got to build a bunch of apps out really quickly. How can we do this? I spent the next month or so kind of looking at different tools. I looked at Titanium. I looked at PhoneGap. I looked at embedding JavaScript. I thought, how can we possibly avoid writing 6 applications? At the same time, making sure that they were all very, very good quality. They were all fast. They had a great UX, and they all felt like an application that a user would actually want to use. And what I kind of realized after about a month was that I just wasted a month of my life. They don't work that well, right? You can build an okay application with these things, and if you kind of have to build out a bunch of applications very quickly, you just have to get them done. We're totally fine for that. But the biggest problem is, the UIs don't look native often. The UIs don't feel native. They don't respond the exact same way. You're oftentimes left with your hacks, not actually looking for an on-click, but looking for an on-press event, something like that, which is just silly. Performance is an issue. I think we all can see that when you try scrolling large lists, it don't work very well. You have to kind of resort to hacks to get that working. Any kind of animation, you have to do CSS transformations to do a sliding animation. No one wants to do that kind of stuff. But I think the biggest thing was that I kind of realized that different application platforms require a different paradigm. The same application should not be on iOS and on Android and on BlackBerry and on MTK and on J2 Meets. These applications need to be different because the people expect different things and they're actually used to experiencing different things. And so that was one of the key things that kind of made me realize, okay, there's no kind of easy way out. So you kind of just have to build native applications sometimes. If you want to make an application that is kind of coming mentioned earlier, is one of the 4 or 5 core ones. Is one of the 4 or 5 core ones that a user is going to be using. That, it has to be in this kind of way. And I kind of look at the 2 or 3 apps that a person uses normally. They always use the phone app, they use the contact app, they use the messaging application. They spend an hour plus a day in these applications, and these are all non-native applications because they have to behave exactly the same way. And I think if you want to have your application have the same kind of feel and have the same kind of stickiness factor, you really, really have to look at building a complete native solution and kind of figure out how can I do this thing. I think the biggest thing is you only have so many pixels on the screen. The screens are about this big, and you really have to control every single one very carefully. You really have to control every animation carefully. You really have to have complete control over that. And the best way to do that is to be as low level as possible, to be as native as possible. I think one of the worst things that as a developer we can kind of do is when our product teams come to us and say, hey, we want to do this, we say, oh, sorry, we can't because we chose an SDK that doesn't do this. It is not powerful, but a competitor may be able to. So to me, it was very, very important that we actually be able to build whatever our product team division, whatever designs they came up with, however amazing or innovative we were, I wanted to be able to execute them. So I said, okay, you know what? There's no kind of easy way out. I got to go build a native application. I think there's a couple kind of things that we have to look at. Like, when does it actually make sense? I think the only couple times it does make sense to build non-native apps is when you really want to do a lot of A/B testing, and maybe you're trying to pull out text. And these are the only areas you kind of do this. I think the other areas are like when you're trying to do a really fast rollout feature. I think that the way that if you look at what Google's done in 4.2 with how they have binary disks for applications, it looks like that there are some technical solutions in mind that are going to allow for really, really easy updated applications. And just with the auto update alone, we're seeing a lot of kind of upgrading the thing much easier. At Amiibo, when we built our iPhone app, we actually had planned for about 2 years of backwards compatibility because we realized how slow users were upgrading. And now that's kind of down to about 6 months. we really don't have to, plan on it. Users will upgrade within 6 months, and it's not a big deal. There's only a small percentage that don't ever do that. So those are kind of getting a lot better right now. And so I think that's why it's okay to get rid of these two things. Say these aren't going to be a big deal for us. We're instead going to build a native application now. The thing you won't notice out here is resource constraints. I don't think it's a big deal if you have to put 1 or 2 more engineers on your mobile products to actually reach a lot of people. A lot of the solutions that people kind of talk about with Titanium and PhoneGap, those really work well on Android and iOS. And those are the 2 biggest ones. So you figure you could probably, if you're going to build on these platforms, you can have one guy devoted to each of these SDKs and build an application on them. If they're, you get a smart guy, you get them really working with partners, it's not a big deal. It becomes difficult when you start looking at 6 or 7 different ones. And you know what? There isn't any sort of PhoneGap that works on MTK or works on J2. It's just at that level, you kind of have to build a customized native application. So today, I'm kind of just going to talk about how to organize yourself to do that. Like, what are the techniques you do? What's the steps to kind of make that sane? I don't think there's any technology that can kind of present and say, hey, if you import this Java library, all of a sudden everything works. And there's no kind of preprocessor that just takes an HTML application and makes it work in 6 seconds. Those things don't exist, and they won't exist for a long time. What we can do is talk about different ways that we can organize ourselves, different processes we can kind of, the steps we take in building an application, such that we shorten the amount of time, we don't waste any time building an application. At the end of like a 6 or 8 month cycle, you've got a full suite of applications that are really high quality, really, really performant, really look really well, and you didn't kill anyone. So hopefully in the last 5 minutes, I kind of, you got to believe me that native applications really are the kind of the best thing ever. Like if you look at things like Instagram and Path, all these are native applications. And if you want to be in the same league, I think you have to build a native application with them. The biggest thing is when I kind of went back and told governments, like, hey, look, we're going to be able to do this, but we're going to have to do this kind of a different way. It really quite by, and I was like, look, we're not going to be able to kind of just do things the way you expect them. We're going to have to do a couple of things very differently. So, it requires kind of buy-in from whoever your executive, whoever's actually paying for your time, really has to understand that you can't just go out and build things at a time. You kind of have to do things a certain way. And it kind of trades like, some initial speed for later on speed. So here are my 5 steps to App Store domination. I think the first one is the most important one, is don't try to do it. It's really, really quite difficult. So the first thing you shouldn't do is immediately go download 5 SDKs and start writing code. That is, a recipe for disaster. The biggest problem is you don't really know what your idea is yet. You don't know what your product idea is. You don't exactly know what you're going to do yet. You definitely don't know how you're going to do it, and you don't really know what exactly it is there. I think the best 2 examples I can think of are Instagram started off as a Foursquare competitor, and eventually became a photo kind of check in publishing site with filters. And Meebo actually started off as a Dropbox competitor, and those are pretty big kind of changes. And so these are your application is going to change drastically from the time you first start it to the time you finish it. And one of the things I kind of think about is if you imagine a motorcycle or a lorry going through traffic, right? Which one is easier to maneuver? It's obviously the motorcycle is. Your viewpoint of the market is going to change in 6 months. Things will be very different, and you don't want to have to carry around 6 applications with you because it's too difficult. You're also going to be tied down by the limitation factors of these different applications. So they're like, oh, I want to do this cool thing, but maybe I can't do it on MTK, so you won't bother with it. And so that's why I think it's really, really important to kind of just focus on one application first. That also allows you to react really, really fast to customer feedback or internal feedback. If someone can have an idea, you can immediately implement it up and push it out that same day. That's really hard to do with 6 applications because, again, you have to go push it out one day becomes 6 times more difficult. It allows you to design it, really your designers and your product team can really focus on one application platform and its paradigms and really, really nail how your application should work first. And that's, again, it's impossible to do with the whole suite of applications. So I think the first thing you're going to have to do is what you said, okay, great, I'm going to go build just one app initially. And you kind of have to pick which one of these is going to do. And the steps you're going to take once you pick this is kind of saying, okay, first you're going to test your idea out. Make sure that your application actually makes sense, that that you like using it, that it actually works as possible. You're going to test out your design, actually make sure that the design that you have in your mind actually is the right one for the users, is actually eliminating friction when the user's trying to do the tasks. And then you're also going to build out your backend because there is, I missed the last talk, but unless it was probably parsed. I'm guessing that you're going to end up having to build a pretty complicated backend to support your global problem. So the first question you kind of answer is which platform are you going to kind of look at first? And I listed off the ones that I first considered. And there's a lot of them out there. There's Android, iOS, S40, Windows, S60, BlackBerry. And I should mention a caveat. Like when we first started, we've been our company is squarely looking at India and other emerging markets. It's very different than the West. Obviously, the West is kind of like an Android, iOS two-horse race, but the rest of the world is completely different. So I think it's, when I first came here, I was under the impression that I could just build an iOS and an Android app and get away with it, and then I very quickly realized that that's not the case. If you want to reach 100 million users in India, you're going to you're going to have to realize immediately that iOS has less than 1% market share. You're not going to do that with an iOS application. So I think when you kind of look at this list, you can kind of immediately ignore the bottom three. I think BlackBerry is a sponsor, so I'm kind of worried about ending that. But BlackBerry is like S60 is end of life. BlackBerry is very much a question mark. BlackBerry 10 looks really cool, but the older versions of BlackBerry are very difficult to work on, and they're kind of like they're not looking like they're growing. And NTK, which is actually the native language that all these kind of Carbon and Lava devices are on, it's also another one of these very difficult to C library, to C SDK. You kind of have to get someone to go actually compile your library into there unless you get to do some with MRE. So it's very difficult. So you're kind of really focusing on the top 12 ones. But the bottom three are really important because sometimes these guys MTK is something like 40% of the Indian market, and that's really important. If you want to think about how can you reach a lot of users, you can't ignore these in the long term. And I think that's something to kind of realize, as well is that India is not a smartphone market yet, and the emerging markets are not really heavily smartphone at all right now. So I think you kind of have to while this is a mobile developer conference, and the term smartphone is really kind of random because what is a smartphone, what isn't. So I kind of went to Wikipedia yesterday and looked at what are the biggest kind of platforms out there right now. And this graph may be difficult to see, but if you look at the big thing that looks like a ski slope, that's BlackBerry. And you can see how dominant it was in 2006. And it's kind of, going through some of those. Android is the green line going up. iOS is the blue line right in the middle. And I don't know, Windows Phone is a little red one coming in right there. So I think the couple of interesting things to notice in this graph is that this is actually a global graph. This doesn't kind of focus on India, I couldn't find that data. But finding other data just let me indicate that Android is only 6% of the market in India. So even if you're selling 100 million phones a year, you're only selling 6 million Android phones. That's not that many. I mean, it's a lot, but it's not 100 million. So I mean, all these numbers kind of get tempered. That the big ones are kind of still, S40 represent 20% market share in emerging markets. Windows Phone is actually 3.6% here. And so these are the kind of things that if you're looking at a Western situation, you would never consider J2ME. Before I came here, I thought J2ME was dead. I used to work with J2ME spec at one time. I thought that it was totally done. When I came to India, I find that it's really alive and still very powerful. Same thing with Windows. It may not be the most happening thing in California, but in India, it's still very powerful. And it's actually it looks like it's going to be growing quite a bit over the next few years. So I think you kind of have to look at your market really carefully, figure out where you can actually differentiate and do well. Because there's certain things like on iOS, you're going to have to work on design really carefully. Design is incredibly important. And the bar is so high on iOS. You also know that you're going to have to compete with a lot of people who are building the same applications out of Silicon Valley. You're going to have to worry about Apple's App Store restrictions, and you're going to have to worry about the kind of restrictions they take. So that's why it's important to kind of evaluate the entire market as well as the capabilities of your platform before you kind of move on. So I kind of made myself easy. I'm like, we're just going to choose Android. It's the easiest thing. It's really easy to push a new application out. It takes maybe 3 hours for the first approval and half an hour after that. It's the most powerful SDK out there. Really, there isn't much you can't do in Android, assuming the user gives permission to it. It has the biggest market share currently right now. And I think the most important thing for us was that on Android, it's kind of like New York City. You can make it there, you can make it anywhere. Because most apps on Android don't look very good. So if you can actually spend a lot of time on design, on UX, I think that's a real differentiating factor for you. And that's something that you can really use to say, my application may be the exact same thing that's out there. It's a better version of that one. It looks better, performs better, and people will start moving that because, again, on mobile, that stuff matters really well. With that in mind, I think it's really important that you spend a lot of time on your first application really polishing it. When we kind of think about our app cycle, we spend about half the time building the feature and half the time polishing it, making sure it works really well. And again, I think that's something that we usually just have to adopt and say this is a cost we have to bear because the difference between an application that's been polished that looks really good and has had someone look at every single screen, look at every flow, look at every animation, look at every pixel, and make sure that they're perfect is drastically different than one that hasn't gone through that process. And doing it upfront in your first application will make your life much easier when you start looking at 4, 5, and 6 other applications you have to build. The next thing is the most important part of it, kind of mobile app, is unless it's just kind of a game, is actually your backend. Right? Your backend is incredibly important. That's kind of where I come from, so I think it's really important. And I think you have to kind of treat it like an actual product. You have to pretend from day one that you're going to have external customers using this, that maybe that you're going to have an API, and that it has to be versioned, it has to be very clearly documented, it has to be tested exactly like you test a product. Like you need to have, if you can afford QA people, you have to have a QA guy actually testing out the backend the exact same way you do the same way. And you should be thinking about backwards compatibility now. As I mentioned before, like 2 years of backwards compatibility is a lot. 6 months is a lot, but it only makes, you only need to make one screw up and realize that, oh man, why did I make that a string? It should have been an object. And all of a sudden you're left doing crazy workarounds. So it's really, really important to start thinking about backwards compatibility now, and also testing the hell out of the backend. That's one of these things where early investment can really pay off later on. Because when you start looking at other applications, if everything's well documented and well thought out and well designed, it makes rolling out more applications very simple. The next kind of step forward is basically how do you plan your next baby? I think the biggest thing is when to know when to start. I think it has to be when your first app is actually functional. Like you actually have to be able to use it and use it every single day and say it actually does what we want it to do. So what the application we built is Hike. It's a messaging application. We didn't start working on the next ones until it was complete. It was 90% feature complete, and we were actually using it every single day to talk to each other. And we liked the design. We made sure that it was something we were really happy with. And then we'd actually started demoing it to other people. We had started letting our friends use it, and they were all happy with it as well. And there was a Paul Graham article a couple of weeks ago where he was talking about kind of growth, and he said it's a good sign when 40% of your users would be upset if you're a startup whatever. And to me that seemed like a good number as well. It's like, okay, if 40% of your users are happy with your current working application, then you can start looking to the other ones. Because at that point in time, you really figured out that you've nailed the design, you really nailed out the feature set, and you can really start to invest in building out 5 or 6 other ones. I think it's really, really important that when you start building these native applications, you kind of have to understand that no one really wants an iOS app on Android. That's probably the biggest thing that's going to piss people off. If you just take an iOS app and build an Android or vice versa. These are very, very different platforms. This is one of the reasons why I think it's important to build native applications, because the app logic itself is sometimes very, very different. You may have the exact same button in two of the places, and it might do different things depending on the platform. Simply because the user experience, the user expectation is very different for these platforms. So I think you kind of have to. One of the things we realized early on was that we had to have developers who were really, really fond and understood the platform well, so they could be advocates for it. So we had to have our Android guy really, really understand the Android platform well, understand its UX considerations and how things should work. We had an iOS guy who said, yes, this is how iOS expects things to be done. Here's how things need to be done the same way. And this needs to be done on every single platform that you have on, because you're going to have a design team, maybe someone who's doing design, and they may not understand all the intricacies and nuances of your platform. So it's very, very important that someone does, and that person honestly usually ends up being a developer. That's another reason I really advocate doing native development, is so that someone who's actually building the app logic knows exactly how things work and how things are supposed to work. At the same time, you want to be, things have to be kind of different. It's okay to make them, to emphasize your brand. You can't imagine a path application that didn't have a little spinny thing in the lower left corner, because that's a integral part of their experience. But that's not mentioned in any kind of app outline. So I had 2 examples from Hike. Fortunately, the second one's not perfect. So the first one here is, we're talking about how do people do navigation. So this left side is actually Windows, the right side is Android. So there's a common paradigm that's showing up, and it's from, I think, Facebook on iOS first. They really talked about the drawer. And that's the right side, what you see here. And I think it's because there isn't no real menu button. There's no menu concept really here. So they were figuring. So Facebook was like, how do we actually give the user a presentation without making it like a context menu that's pretty ugly? And they come with a drawer. And basically, it's a window. The card view slides over. There's a list of options you can navigate in there. And Facebook uses it, Spotify uses it, Tap uses it, and it's showing up a lot. Hike has it in there. It's showing up a lot of really cool applications right now. I think Facebook now has drawers on both sides, and it's pretty neat to watch it kind of animate and slide out. So we said, okay, great, this seems like a really cool, this is a good UX for presenting a list of navigation elements, so we integrated it into our iOS application. And then we looked at the Android application. The Android application has a menu button. And if you look at the new SDK, they're also advocating having a menu bar. And we looked at that as well. We said, okay, would we rather have the drawer, or would we rather have the menu bar? And we felt that, this was actually something that is part of our brand, that we can make it part of our brand, and we want to actually keep it part of our brand. So we said we're going to break the existing rules of how Android would recommend doing it, and instead do it this way. And we think it's okay because it gets our application in the office. And we felt like this was an important part of something that we wanted to build out here. But on Windows, they have a different concept. They have a panorama view. So you kind of swipe left and right, and you get different options to swipe. And it looks really cool when you actually see it. Like you can see the chat screen, which is kind of faded out, so the user knows they can swipe left or right. And the animations are very really slick. So we said, okay, great, this is actually how Windows users will expect things, so let's keep it this way. And let's not implement this kind of drawer thing, because if we'd done that, I think it would have looked really strange. Sorry, I can move this back. The next screen is actually, I guess, QuickTime, and this is a Windows laptop, but I'll talk about it, I guess. The biggest thing we kind of noticed was that, when we had built our Android app, it was like, May or April, we started on our iOS application, and we were looking at how the transitions happen between different screens, or in Android kind of parlance, activities. And we noticed that in iOS, there was some, every single different screen had a great transition. And on Android, that doesn't really happen. Right? On 2.3, they do the left or right swipe, with a real bit of fade. On 4.0, I think they're doing just a crossfade. And it wasn't consistent, and it was always the same kind of thing. And we said, and we kind of like, we were looking at the iOS application saying, this is something that looks much better now. So we took that and we said, how can we add this in Android? So we went ahead and actually looked at the documentation. It's really easy to add transitions between activities. A lot of people don't do it, but there's like just 1 or 2 APIs. You have to either do it with styles or you override any transition. And it takes like half an hour. But most people don't actually end up doing it. But because we kind of looked at our iOS application, realized that it was happening there, and it made the app feel better, we took that concept, put it back into the Android application, and it felt a lot better at that point in time. We feel like users understood it a lot better. That's one of the things we kind of noticed on Android is that transitions are a lot of time overlooked, a lot more than they are looked on Windows. And it's really, really important because in a limited screen, the user really needs to understand what's going on, and transitions kind of help make the connection to that. And step 5 is kind of just like build like crazy. At this point in time, you've kind of figured out, you've already got a good fit for your application. You know that it works well. Your design has been vetted. You've already kind of gone through all the weird, like, should we put the button here, should we put the button there, should we be blue? You've already done all that crap. And now you can kind of say, this is the right design, we know it's going to be. Because I think as developers, we've all kind of felt the pain of implementing the same feature 6 times because people want different things here. And so this kind of avoids that problem, saying, well, just put it off, do only one, let people kind of be settled to get this is great, and then kind of iterate on that. You've also got valuable user feedback. Your app may be in the market already. You already know what users are liking, what they're not liking. And you kind of start to sit there and prioritize the ones they're liking over the ones they're not liking. And maybe make your app slimmer and less complicated. There's a lot of great things you can kind of just copy left and right. Like I noticed that our core networking library is actually almost line by line identical between our .NET and Java versions. I mean, there's small syntactical differences, but the logic is exactly the same. So there are actually utilities that let you kind of convert a piece of Java code to a piece of Objective-C code or a piece of Java code to .NET code. And those work a lot of time for these utility classes for a lot of things that are maybe not app logic, but just kind of things that have to get done. Maybe you need some normalization or some kind of stuff like that. So this ended up helping us a lot. Like we were able to build all of our other apps in maybe a third of the time that the first one took, simply because we already spent all the time polishing it. We knew exactly what the app should be doing in every single screen. Our QA had already spent a lot of time testing out the application, and they knew how our test cases were all completed at that point in time. And we'd also been able to eliminate some features we knew just weren't going to work out. And so it really made our second, I think we've all done the same thing here. We write some code, you accidentally delete it, and the second time around you do it in 20 minutes. And so the same thing kind of happens here. Is like once you've done it once, it's very easy to do it the second time around because you can avoid a lot of mistakes you did the first time. And so that can actually work across multiple platforms. And so this is how I think about this whole code reuse. This is where it happens right here. It's not about just doing everything in JavaScript and adding a web view around it. It's about saying, look, I built my application once really, really well. I've understood what the differences need to be across different platforms. And now I'm simply going to iterate and move fast, and I'm going to copy the parts that be the same. And I've already enumerated what the differences are, and I already know what it's going to be. So everything's kind of laid out. And again, we all know that if we know exactly what to do, it's very crazy to write code. It's only when you have no idea what to do next that kind of things become difficult. And this eliminates a lot of that uncertainty. I think the most important thing is to understand where the platform is really different, and where you're going to kind of get practice. And here's the 3 kind of areas we found when we were building an application. The biggest one was that SQL database lookups are completely different across the different things, and how they operate, and just how they actually feel. Like Windows 7.5 Windows Phone has a link to SQL stuff, but it's terrible compared to something like Android. Even iOS is just not as performant as the Android implementations are. So we took our application, did the exact same logic ran in Windows Phone. Things that took 6 microseconds took 6 seconds, and that kind of stuff said, okay, we got to go back and kind of look at So this is the first place you kind of have to start looking at. How do we denormalize all of our queries? We made sure that all the pages, like all the UI could be rendered from one DB lookup and that kind of stuff. And it was stuff that we didn't have to do in Android, but we could actually follow different normalization formats and deal properly corrected by SQL. But it went out the door when we started looking at our iOS, our applications. The other thing is animation type events. I think we all kind of know that animation on other platforms such as iOS is not oftentimes at best. Keyframes aren't available in Android yet, or available after 3.0. So things are going to kind of lag. So if you have a lot of crazy cool animations in your design, it may not be possible in Android at this point in time, but it may be possible in iOS. So if you started off building something in iOS and want to port it to Android, this is an area you're going to have to kind of compromise a little bit on that. The same thing, like we've been building out an S40 application. So sometimes touch effects just aren't as responsive. So we need to make sure that if there are areas that we thought like, hey, a smaller icon would work, it has to be a very large field. You have to kind of recognize those kind of things. But again, if you kind of know about these up front, it's not that big of a deal. And the last one is app start. Again, on Android, because you can have services, because the apps are all kind of running the back end a little bit, app startups are really, really kind of fast. Again, this is also loaded to database loading, that kind of stuff. It's really important to kind of profile your app when startups and make sure that they start up really quickly, within 1 or 2 seconds. And it's the kind of thing that you notice that again when we have our biggest competitor is WhatsApp. On one of the low end of phones, WhatsApp takes 15 seconds to load it. Our app takes 3 seconds to load it. And that's the only thing our app initially took 15 seconds to load too, but we went back, changed the whole design to understand the limitations of the phone and said, okay, we're going to instead do something different, which is different than our Android application. But again, all these things weren't that difficult. We don't have to kind of optimize a couple, 10 to 15% of the code to handle this. The rest of the stuff we can kind of just use the Android as a blueprint and start to move things over as fast as possible. So that's actually my whole talk. I know I went this fast, but that's just what I do. So I think that if you kind of look at this is the steps. You should avoid building full screen initially. You should really start with Android because it's probably the most completely powerful and available. You should treat your backend like a product so you can actually have a complete backend that's documented in your life easier. Polish your first app is crazy. Really, really spend time nailing your design, making sure that it's absolutely perfect before you start copying it. And then iterate on that app until you've got a good fit. Until you start a timer for it, until you've got demand for the application. So people are saying, hey, you have an iOS app build. At that point in time, start copying your app like crazy. And you know what, life is actually today we're actually submitting our Windows apps and our iOS application. In about a week we're submitting our Spark application. About 8 developers, so we don't have a large team. And we only started growing this. We only started developing these apps in maybe May. And the apps take, the first one took about 8 or 9 months, and then 8 or 9 months to complete. So it's a fairly complicated piece of code. But because we kind of followed the steps, we were able to do the next 4 versions very, very quickly. So